So not too long ago, I reviewed the iPhone 12 and recently reviewed the iPhone 13, and both of those videos actually performed very well. So clearly a lot of people are interested in these two phones right now. So naturally comparing these two phones seemed like the only right thing to do because there are some key differences between these two phones that you should absolutely know about before buying either one of them. And actually, if you end up buying the iPhone 12, you might be able to save a ton of money and use it for buying something else, like AirPods, for example. But of course, for that, you would need to know if the iPhone 12 is good enough for you. And for that, you would need to know those differences. So one of those differences is in the cameras. And it is pretty obvious, right? Because not only does the iPhone 13 have a completely different camera layout, but the cameras are actually bigger. And well, there's a reason for that. This phone has a larger main sensor compared to the iPhone 12. Now, in bright and well-lit situations, there isn't much of a difference between the shots taken from these phones. They look great. They're exposed properly with a good amount of detail, accurate colors, good dynamic range, and good contrast. And the same goes for portrait mode photos. They also look pretty good on both phones. The 13 does look better, but you really have to look for that difference in order to see it. And if you don't have these phones side by side, then you'll probably never see it, which is a good thing for the iPhone 12. However, when it starts to get dark, then you really start to see some of the major differences. The photos from the 13 are clearly better. They're sharper, brighter, and they appear to have less noise and better colors. This is simply because of the larger sensor. It can capture more light, which results in better photos. But an even bigger difference is in features. The iPhone 13 has more camera features, such as cinematic mode photo styles, which are kind of like filters, but not exactly that, and the ability to record HDR video at 60 frames per second compared to 30 on the iPhone 12. But cinematic mode in particular is probably my favorite one because I actually find myself using it since it doesn't look bad. But don't get me wrong, it can be a lot better, especially edge detection, but it's not terrible either. In fact, it's quite usable. Now, both phones do have the same lenses or focal lengths. So you do get the same 26mm equivalent main wide-angle lens as well as a 13mm equivalent ultra-wide-angle lens on both phones. But the 13 also takes better ultra-wide shots. It's a bit sharper in this case, especially on the edges, but the difference isn't huge. And the selfie cameras on the other side also take pretty good photos, but the 13 is yet again slightly better. It is a bit sharper with more accurate colors, although it's not easy to see that because of how small the difference is. The selfie cameras are basically the same. But these similarities also continue throughout the screen. Both phones have exactly the same Full HD 60Hz screens, with the only difference being in the notch and brightness. The iPhone 12 can go as high as 625 nits of brightness, while the 13 goes all the way to 800 nits. And that extra brightness on the iPhone 13 can be seen in really bright conditions, but the difference is, again, so small that it should just be ignored. Plus, if you spend most of your time indoors anyways, then this isn't something you should be worried about at all, because the iPhone 12 screen is still visible outdoors. The 13 is just more visible. That's all. And when it comes to the notch, it's just 20% smaller on the iPhone 13. That's it. As far as functionality goes, it's exactly the same because this phone doesn't even utilize that extra space for something useful. So what you really need to know is that both of these phones have pretty good OLED screens that are just a little more than 1080p in resolution. So not exactly the best of the best, but honestly, they're good enough for most people. By the way, this wallpaper you're looking at right now is actually my wallpaper. I made an entire wallpaper pack with 31 wallpapers like these that you can download right now for 100% free from this beautiful website that I created using Squarespace in like 3 hours from scratch. And that's really what Squarespace is. It allows you to build professional looking websites for your business, your online store, your portfolio, or whatever without any coding knowledge or any kind of prior experience in web designing. They've got award-winning templates. You can run marketing campaigns, access analytics. They've got great SEO tools and so much more to help you succeed, and even 24/7 customer service. So if you do get stuck, you can always ask for help. So check out squarespace.com/spixel to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or even a domain. And thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Now, one of the biggest differences between these two phones is one you probably never thought about, but it is kind of important because I'm talking about storage here. The base model iPhone 12 comes with 64 gigabytes of storage, while the iPhone 13, the base model iPhone 13, comes with 128 gigs of storage. So it's twice as much. Now, this is a good and a bad thing because having more storage is good, but if you stop managing it, then it becomes a pain in the butt. So just know that. Now, where things get a lot more interesting is when we start talking about battery life, because this is something pretty much everyone cares the most about. But the thing is, battery life is subjective because One, it really depends on how you use your phone. And two, when talking about older phones, you cannot forget about battery health, because two same phones with different battery healths can have a different battery life. So it varies from phone to person to person. So things can get complicated fast. But either way, when I use these phones, I was easily able to get around 4 hours of screen on time with 40 to 50% battery remaining on the iPhone 13 with 97% battery health. But on the 12, it was more like 3 hours of screen on time with also 40 to 50% battery remaining with 88% battery health. And on some heavier days with 6 to 7 hours, I had 20 to 30% battery remaining on the iPhone 13. And on the 12 with 5 hours, I had around 30% battery remaining. Now, I'll admit that this is kind of confusing. It's hard to compare and instantly draw any conclusions with all these different numbers and percentages and everything. I get it. But with some analysis and some math, I was able to figure out that if both phones had the same battery health, you can still expect the iPhone 13 to last longer than the iPhone 12 for about an hour longer. And this is actually interesting because Apple claims an extra 2.5 hours of screen on time from the iPhone 13, but my testing says something else, which shows that battery life really is subjective. But anyways, the good news is that both of these phones have pretty good battery life. The 13's is better for sure, but both should get you through your day on a single charge. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters. But you see, in these phones, battery life isn't independent. It depends a lot on the processor, if that makes sense, because usually the less power the processor consumes, the longer the phone lasts. So the iPhone 13 having better battery life than the 12 is also because of it having a newer, better, and more efficient processor. This phone has the A15 Bionic chip inside along with 4 gigs of RAM, but the iPhone 12 has the A14 Bionic chip inside with also 4 gigs of RAM. Now, this is an actual difference on paper, but in real life, you cannot tell the difference. I haven't done a side-by-side speed test or anything like that, but if you're just normally using these phones, the performance difference is basically indistinguishable. Both feel really smooth and responsive, and they do not lag or anything like that. Both can even handle some graphically intensive tasks like gaming or photo and video editing. But for everyday tasks like watching videos, browsing through the internet, using social media, and stuff like that, they're perfect. No complaints at all. And the build quality is also something that doesn't concern me even a little bit. Both of these phones are built very well and actually feel like premium devices. Both are also IP68 water and dust resistant. So if you drop your phone in, I don't know, a puddle or something, it should be just fine. Or if you happen to jump in a pool with your phone in your pocket, it still should be just fine. Although I try to tell people to not do that on purpose, because the older these phones get, the less water and dust resistant they become. So the big question, should you go with the iPhone 12 or the 13? Well, I think the answer really comes down to where you're buying these phones from. If you're just getting them straight from Apple, then there is absolutely no reason to buy the iPhone 12. There's like a $50 difference here in Canada between them. And for that, this phone is not worth it at all. Just get the 13. But if you do plan on buying from somewhere else, like maybe eBay or Facebook Marketplace or something similar, then I do think the iPhone 12 is something to consider if it meets your needs, because you might be able to save up to $300 to maybe even $400, which is a good amount of money to be saving. But of course, if the iPhone 13 is the only one that meets your needs, then for sure, get the 13. But still, try to get it from somewhere other than Apple, because you might be able to save some money here too. By the way, I don't hate Apple or anything like that. I'm just telling the truth and trying to help. That's all. So if you did find this video helpful, consider subscribing, follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and I'll see you later.